Hello everyone. So in this last video on the Pythagoreans, we'll talk about their cosmology and the idea of the harmony of the spheres, and we'll see how their cosmology proceeds from this very complex number theory, their mathematics, and their idea of sort of the soul and the immortality of the soul. So they're all connected in a slightly confusing manner, but connected, right? So cosmology first. So the cosmos, really, as you saw, the world is composed of these numbers, of this unit that proceeds to a line, that proceeds to a surface, that proceeds to a solid object. That solid object then makes sensible bodies, and these sensible bodies move. And when these sensible bodies move, they form a cosmos. And these sensible bodies moving would produce a sound, which will lead to a sort of harmony in both senses, joining together, but also harmonious sound. And so you will have something much more sort of beautiful and orderly at the end of the whole thing, right? So when we're talking about the cosmos, the growth of the cosmos proceeds from the center outwards. As things proceed from a unit outwards, it proceeds from the center outwards. And interestingly, for the Pythagoreans, the Earth is not at the center. Yeah, and there is some evidence that Copernicus later was sort of influenced by the Pythagoreans, though he would, again, like us, not have had any of the real sort of text of Pythagoras himself. But maybe, some of the ideas of Pythagoreans circulating he would have read. Right, so the Earth then, for the Pythagoreans, is just a planet which is circling, around the center, like other planets. And what is the center? So the center, and then you have Aristotle sort of complaining about it. So the center for the Pythagoreans is a fire, right? Is a central fire. So he says, so we have Aristotle. He says, most people say that the Earth lies at the center of the universe. But the Italian philosophers known as Pythagoreans take the contrary view. At the center, they say, is fire, and the Earth is one of the stars, creating night and day by its circular motion about the center, right? So at the center, you have the fire, and the Earth rotates, and that's how it creates night and day. They further construct another Earth in opposition to ours, to which they give the name CounterEarth. And if you remember, they do it also to get to the number 10, right? So there is a counter-Earth that they create. In all this, they're not seeking for theories and causes to account for sort of observed facts, but rather forcing their observations and trying to accommodate them to certain theories and opinions of their own. So that's just Aristotle being judgmental out, I think. But yeah, there's some observation, I'm sure, and some really trying to fit it into their theories. But the counter-Earth definitely to get to the number 10. Yeah. So, yeah, do I want to read more from this? Yeah, why not? So he says, but there are many others who would agree that it is wrong to give the Earth the central position, looking for confirmation rather to theory than to facts of observation. Their view is that the most precious place befits the most precious thing, right? Which is the fire, they say, is more precious than Earth. And the limit than the intermediate, and the circumference and the center are limits. Reasoning on this basis, they take the view that it is not Earth that lies at the center of the sphere, but the fire. The Pythagoreans have a further reason. They hold that the most important part of the world, which is the center, should be most strictly guarded, and name it, or rather the fire which occupies the place, the guard house of Zeus, as if the word center were quite unequivocal, and the center of the mathematical figure were always the same with that of the thing or the natural center. But it is better to conceive of the case of the whole heaven as analogous to that of animals, in which the center of the animal and that of the body are different. So this is Aristotle again critiquing the Pythagoreans, but we get more or less of an idea of their cosmology. And I've tried to draw a diagram out here, which is not very good right now, but you'll also see, I'll share this in the interactive session with you. So basically at the center you have this fire, which is invisible to us because we are turned away from it. So the central fire we are turned away from. And the sun, the moon, the known planets, everything are revolving around, right? And the Earth has day and night because it faces the sun from at some points and faces the moon and doesn't face the sun rather at other points. And which means that we have day and night through the action of the rotation and revolution of the Earth and the sun. Both of them are revolving. right? So in this solar system, we have the sun, which is 1, the earth, 2, moon, 3, and 5 planets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a central fire, right? So that's why we need one more thing. What is the other thing that they do? Then they add the earth, counter-earth, right? This counter-earth, however, is also invisible to us. We don't see it. And because it's moving at the other side of the fire, so we're all revolving, so we never sort of end up meeting the counter-earth. But the moon, sun, and planets, we do meet because they revolve at certain times in which they pass sort of the earth. So we do see them at times. And then outside is the sphere of the fixed stars. Yeah. And so just like the moon is a reflection of the sun, is what they say, which is nice, the sun is a reflection of the central fire. So say later sources that the sun itself gets its light from the central fire. And again, we have moved to a cosmology or cosmogony of these things being objects and not gods. Do notice that we are not talking about the sun god or of Mercury or or of any of the planets as being gods. Rather, you have the planets and the sun and the moon and everything, which are sort of material objects, but material objects composed of numbers. We'll see as we saw rather, not we'll see, as we already saw, right? So they understand. So the counter-earth, as we said, they got it from the decade to get the number 10, and they say that the cosmos does have a beginning because it began from this unit which existed at the center, and from that it expanded. But once it has come into being, it is eternal, right? So it is not constantly expanding. We'll see that happens with later thinkers, like with Anaxagoras. We'll see that it is constantly expanding. With them, no. Once it forms like this perfect system, the cosmos, it places limits, and that's why the limits are necessary. It doesn't, like the unlimited wants it to expand, but the limit sort of stops it and says, okay, you've got to the 10, and now you've got to the 10, then you don't want it to go any further, right? Then he talks about eclipses of the moon, and he says the eclipses of the moon, or they talk rather, are caused due to Earth's shadow and due to the action of the counter-Earth. So even though Aristotle says they're not talking from observation, I think Aristotle is being very mean. They do have some observation, and they do make some reflections from observations as well. So here they are talking about eclipses as because the moon comes in between. Because remember, we are all revolving, which means that at some point the moon will come in between us and the sun, right? So that's why we have eclipses, which is how we think of eclipses as well. Then the day-night alternance I already talked about is due to turning towards the sun or being in the sun's sort of shadow. So depending on which side we are, so we have day and night. And in fact, they also explain volcanoes and hot springs, the geysers. They explain them through the hypothesis of there being a fire at the center of the earth, which is actually very interesting, So they do talk about, like that there must be a central fire inside the earth as well. So it's not, like the usual idea you would have is that the dense, the moist goes inside, so it is all inside as water. They would say that the center of the earth, and the earth is a sphere. They also think of the earth as a sphere, and the center of the earth, you have like a fire again, and that fire is what manifests itself as volcanoes, the magma coming out in modern terms, and as hot springs. So there is that as well. And early Pythagoreans perhaps did think of the earth as flat, but later Pythagoreans do say that it is possibly spherical. So we have again contrary notions, but they did have an idea of the sphericity of the cosmos, right? Some people even claim that the moon is a kind of counter-earth, and the central fire is an animating creative power, but Aristotle at least says that no, the counter-earth is a 10th thing away from the moon. But yeah, the central fire could actually be a kind of animating creative power at the center. So you have you have a notion of a solar system, except it's not a solar system, it's a system around the central sort of hearth, this fire, this idea of, and in the houses as well, they would have a hearth where they would have a fire. In temples, you would have a, perpetual fire. So perhaps all these notions are coming in when they talk about the central fire and everything revolving around it, right? Now to end, I would really like to talk about, well, the idea of the harmony of the spheres before I end, actually. So now all these things going around are creating sounds, and that's something that they really insisted upon, that all solid objects, when they vibrate, when they move, they would create sound. And as I said, for Pythagoreans, music was the central way of understanding the universe. So the moving astronomical bodies create a musical harmony, and great bodies moving at enormous speeds produce a sound by their movement, right? And the sound of great loudness. It's very, very loud sound. And so the sounds of the stars and the planets as they revolve, and they have this idea that, of course, these are heavenly bodies, so they revolve in ratio. They revolve in very good ratio. So they produce these musical consonances which are concordant. So in fact, if they revolve in ratios of the 1:2, 2:3, and 3:4, then they would be producing this very, very concordant sound of na, na. So yeah, so I'll try and show the sort of the idea of harmony as they understand it by playing some sounds on the piano, and you'll see, what's going on. So if you think of the octave, it's the sound, yeah. Then you have the fifth, which would be, and the fourth. Right? And all of these sounds are considered harmonious. Then the sounds of the scale really would be, right? But think about playing all of them together. Not quite a harmonious sound, right? I mean, it's not the sort of greatest harmonious sound. So, given that we think that they were unless of course you go by the sort of fairly modern contemporary classical music sort of sounds. So with the Pythagoreans, we are assuming that when they're talking about the harmony of the spheres, they're talking about them in these particular mathematical ratios, which do not take, the ratios of 9/8, right? Because it's also not supposed to be that harmonious, but well, still not too bad. But yeah. This sound was considered to be sort of a bit more harmonious. Now, given that all these astronomical bodies, we think of them as melodic lines, not as harmonic lines, but when all these bodies are moving, so what happens is that they're moving together, which means that they're producing the sound together, and they're producing apparently this great harmonious sound of great loudness, by the revolution. And this sound has been with us, since we were born. It has always been there. And given that there's no contrasting silence to show it up, thus we are not aware of it, right? So why don't we hear the sound of this great loudness of, the cosmos moving? It's because it's there to such an extent that we don't even realize it's there, right? It's always been there. We need a silence to. So when I played that, you have this gap, and that's how you know that sound was played, because that sound was not played otherwise. So the reason we can't hear the sound of the harmony of the spheres is because there is no contrasting silence to show it, right? And the whole universe really then is constructed according to a musical scale, yeah. And the distance between bodies revolving around the centers are mathematically proportionate, as we saw. But the important numbers are the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And some move faster, some move slower. And the slower bodies give a lower pitch, the faster bodies give a higher pitch. And that too would not remove from the harmony, right? So long as we keep to these 4. So we'll have, yeah? So any of these sounds will not be seen as disharmonious. So all of these sounds are being produced by these bodies, right? And these resultant notes corresponding to the ratios of distances make the resultant sounds concordant, right? Because they're always in good ratio, so the sounds become concordant. Whether you have right? Whichever sound you have, the sounds will turn up to be concordant. Yeah. And in that sense, number becomes the source of harmony, also of joining together, of the bodies moving together, of musical sound, of everything. But they have to be in these mathematical proportions of 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then the total is the number 10, as you saw, right? And Cicero sort of, says the harmony we may open for ourselves. By understanding and in our own way reproducing this harmony, we may open for ourselves a way back to the divine, right? So now, to conclude, so you had a bit of an entertainment program, though I didn't play any sort of good music out there. But you got an idea of the relationship between number, harmony, astronomical sort of movement, cosmology, about solid objects, sensible objects, and sound, and the idea of the harmony of the spheres. What could it possibly mean? So, to conclude then, we have, when we talk about abstractions as numbers, when we are talking about all of these as numbers, one thing that is really important to understand the Pythagoreans, or to get any sense of them, understanding the Pythagoreans may be beyond, our modern capabilities, perhaps. We were also not initiated into that group, so maybe that's what is missing. When they say that everything is an embodiment of number, they are losing that distinction between abstract and concrete, right? Because numbers we think of as abstractions, while the world, sensible objects, and including sound, we think of as concrete objects. Now, they are really not making that distinction. So that's why when they go to say things like justice is a number, 4 or 5 or 9, there's even 9, the 3 square, so even 3 squared is also justice. So all these things become justice. So when they think of it that way, or they think of marriage as the number 5, or they talk about opportunity or chance as the number 7 because it's the first prime number. It's not the first prime number, is it? Maybe it is. Well, anyway, they think of it as like a good prime number, and so that's why they think of it as the number of opportunity or chance. And then they think of the soul as a number 1. What they're basically doing is they are really not distinguishing abstract and concrete. And this is something that Aristotle couldn't understand. And because we are Aristotelians, really, when we do Western philosophy, and in fact, our thought processes in many ways have been so influenced by Aristotle that perhaps maybe that's why the Pythagoreans are even more difficult to understand. And the soul, to come back to it, because that is the most important thing. Because remember, for the Pythagoreans, the whole point of doing this, why are we even doing philosophy? Why are we even sort of going ahead and talking about sort of the world, about the numbers and mathematics and everything, is because they have this pivotal conception of the ideal of assimilating with the divine, right? This ideal of correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm, the conception of harmony, the doctrine of numbers, the tetractys, as you saw, the number 1, 2, 3, 4, the idea of the monad of opposites, of limit, of justice, which was, monad, if you think of it as 1, opposites as 2, limit as 3, and justice as, 4 maybe. All of these together, will form the central notion of the soul as a harmonia, right? Because with the soul, what you have is the idea finally of what Aristotle was talking about, the ultimate element of everything is number. And this number is the mathematical proportion of the cosmos, which is perfect, divine, permanent, right? It's a single sort of divine unity, the harmonia, the joining together of everything. And our individual souls, as we talked about in the earlier week, is just sort of fragment, is formed of fragments of the divine soul. And any kind of impurity which happens with us being born in the cycle of reincarnation, we subdivide the soul into ourselves, is not yet a cosmos. There is not yet an attunement. And so there is a lack of harmony, which then needs to be redressed by a balancing of things, right? So eventually, one of the important ideas that they brought forth was the idea of the soul as a kind of attunement. The idea of the soul as a kind of attunement of the parts of the body, of the world, of everything together. And I'll end by talking about this out here. Some of the quotes from Aristotle, really, where he says, they say that it is a kind of attunement, that is, the soul is a kind of attunement, for attunement is a blending and composing of opposites, and the body is constituted of opposites, right? But they only attempt to say what sort of a thing a soul is, while concerning the body, that is to receive it, they specify nothing further, as if it were possible by the Pythagorean tales for any chance soul to enter into any chance body, right? So you had this double thing of the world being a cosmos, but there being some kind of acosmia in there, some kind of disorder in there. And so that's how, we get separated from this divine thing, and we are not attuned. And so all this mathematics, all this proportionality, all this music was extremely important to them, is to bring our souls in attunement and harmony with this divine single soul, with this one unit. And here we again start slipping into a kind of monism of the Pythagoreans from the pluralism and dualism that we all saw, but bringing together all their sort of religious and mathematical and mystical and musical and astronomical and cosmological doctrines into this one whole system and the idea of the soul. And that's why the divine soul pervades everything, because that's what tunes everything. It's the attunement of everything. And the heavenly bodies are well attuned, and which is why they play only these nice harmonious sort of notes and in proportion. But we are out of tune, like when I speak, or when I even live, I'm out of tune with this divine soul. And so the whole point of my life then for Pythagoreans is to come back into tune, to get back into attunement, and which I will be able to do according to the Pythagoreans by living a particular kind of life. And that's why for them, ritualistic practices were so important. Anyway, we'll discuss more of this in our interactive sessions, because I think we need some diagrams to get, a bit into the meat of the argument, though Pythagoreans, vegetarian, don't eat meat. So there's this sort of notion of what's going on. So yeah, look forward to the interactive session based on this. Thank you.